Hi everyone, thanks for being with me again for session 3 of our anger management program, which we call What to Do About Anger. As I said to you, I think in the first session that this is not about anger as being a bad thing. It's about simply understanding where anger sits in our lives and how we can best utilize it for things that are positive, and how we can eliminate the behavior that sits around anger that causes us to impact other people's lives in ways which are damn unhelpful. So, and we talked last time about early warning signs. So what do we notice that's happening to us? And I just want to reiterate that at the beginning of this particular session. So wanted to have a look at, and I said in groups, clearly we're not a group. Yes, but as an individual, you can actually write some of these down. So I suggest that you put on a piece of paper, you have 3 columns. The first column is mood, the second column is body or physical, and the third one is behavior. And what we do when we look at each of these 3 columns, we decide that when I'm starting to feel angry, what mood am I in? Am I sad, rejected, fearful? What sort of sits in that column for you? The body and the physical side is, what do I notice happening to my body? Is my heart racing? Am I sweating? Are the palms of my hand sweating? So what happens to me physically? Am I tapping my feet? Am I walking and pacing a lot? What do I notice before the explosion? And the last one is also behavior. What odd behaviors do you notice? One of them could be raising your voice, for example, changing your tone. Pardon me. So what are the behaviors that you notice? And so you list all of these into these 3 columns, come up with as many as you can, because with regard to any of this stuff that you're coming up with now, you will find that if you become aware of it, you'll be able to put an end to what may follow in terms of behavior that's unhelpful or harmful to others. So identify what your mood is, identify the things that's happening to you physiologically and to your body, and just identify some of the behaviors that you might have as well. Because once you identify, prior to getting to that point where you're really super angry and you lash out at people, you should do what I think I talked about last time, was you should put a gap in place. So you should be able to say, well, in this moment, I'm going to a place that I really don't want to go to. So because I've now identified what's happening to me, and normally this goes to this other place, I'm going to put a stop to it. I'm going to put a gap to it. Now, some people will say that gap is brief, but for most of us, we can experience that. Regardless of how brief that is, we have something happening to us before we get to that point. We just don't snap. We actually have things happening prior to that. So if we can identify them, then that would clearly be helpful. So what we're going to look at now is the anger cycle. Now, in this cycle, it's a compilation of feelings and behaviors that people experience. The aim is to break this cycle by developing skills to express yourself assertively, which is something we're going to discuss later. Don't let things build up. Don't be motivated by guilt, as this leads you to setting unrealistic goals. Use time out. Acknowledge your angry feelings, which is what we've kind of already talked about. Use I statements, which we're going to discuss, and avoid blaming others for how you feel. All of these skills will help you break the anger cycle. And one of the hardest things, I think, is and I think as a society we tend to do this, which is blaming others for how it is that we're feeling, to fail to take responsibility for the things that we're doing, but want to say, for example, you made me do this. Well, no one makes us do anything. We choose to do things. We might be impacted by other people, but people don't make us do things. In terms of particularly how we're feeling and how we respond around our feelings, we choose to do those things. So, you raised your voice at me, or you criticized me, or whatever. So using those you statements are often unhelpful, because we still choose how it is that we wish to behave. Now, I must say, folks, I'm pretty excited about this. So I did this graphics over 30 years ago, and I'm still proud of it at a time when PowerPoint wasn't as clever and as brilliant as it is today. But we're just going to go through this. It's really important to understand what this cycle represents, because it is about us choosing not to do this cycle, to finding ways to break through so that we won't continue these behaviors in the future. So the first thing that happens, of course, and I would often say to people, what happens at the beginning? And clearly it's a type of explosion of some sort. So that's you feeling angry and choosing to behave, which is by yelling, screaming, shouting, hitting out, verbally assaulting or physically assaulting another. So this is where the explosion happens. But then we must ask, well, what happens after the explosion? Well, in this period, we're becoming aggressive. There's some sort of aggressive behavior. There's this notion that you're right and the other person is wrong. Now, most of you would have experienced that. Most of us do. Once we experience that, we'd find ways that we could intimidate the other person in order to get them to agree with us, because at the end of the day, agreeing with us is probably the most important thing that we could ask people to do, because we need people to see things as we see them. We need them to agree with our perspective. We need to be right. And when we don't get that, we want to punish them. In fact, we want to hurt the other person. So we become demanding, we're blaming, we're name-calling, we're shouting, we're yelling, and we're lashing out. We're doing all of these things simply because we're feeling angry, and perhaps in some cases we simply want to be heard and we believe that we're not. So this is where the explosion tends to occur. And then there's this aftermath, which is this really interesting period, because this is where we've recognized that we've done something that's harmful to another person. And I think most of us that have been there would understand this. We realize that our aggressive behavior, this notion that I must be right, and that we lashed out at this person because they weren't listening to us, or they walked away from us, or whatever the case might be. And we realized that they're hurt by whatever it was that we did. And so we feel guilty. And when we feel guilty, we apologize, we promise, look, it'll never happen again. We blame ourselves for that. We feel bad about it. We feel remorseful, and we feel often very sulky. And we go into this space which is, I should never have done it. I will never do it again. And that I'm trying to repair this relationship as best as I can. Now, following from this becomes this really interesting stage, which we call the false calm. And it's in the false calm that we start to mitigate against whatever it is that we've done. So we start doing things for the other person. So we might do the dishes, we might clean the gutter, we might vacuum the house, we might choose to do things that make us look good in the eyes of the other person. And we're trying to repair whatever it was that we had done. Now, I believe that this is the most horrific and embarrassing part of the anger cycle, and particularly us as men. I find this absolutely disgraceful. Now, the reason why I say that is that we're trying to mitigate against something that has harmed somebody else by us behaving in ways which we think are going to rectify this situation. And the question that I ask everybody that I do in these groups, and which I get the most interesting response, and I'll explain that in a moment, because most people, when I say while we've gone through the aftermath and while we're now into the false calm, where's the other person, the other adult, or even the children? Where are they in this cycle? Because at the moment, this cycle is all about us. It's about us apologizing. It's about us changing our behavior momentarily. It's all about what we can do to make this better for us. So where's the other person? And often when I'm working in groups, people struggle with this because they don't recognize, and this is really important that you recognize this, that the person whom you have abused is still at the top. They're still at the explosion stage. They haven't moved beyond what you've done and how that's impacted them. They are stuck in that. And then you go through this other process, though, which is all about you and about apologizing and stuff, and without no consideration really to where the other person is. All you want to do often in these situations is to repair the relationship. You cannot repair a relationship if you fail to acknowledge that your behavior has hurt or impacted somebody else. You just can't do that. So in this period, we're starting to feel better about ourselves, but we're ignoring the impact that we've had on the other person. To me, none of this so far makes the relationship any better. You've made it worse by the explosion. You've behaved in all these other ways, and what's going to happen next? So what we discover is that there is this period which is the build-up. So after you've done what you think is healthy and what you've done which you think is rectifying or improving the relationship, you're now forgetting what you have done or how what you've done has impacted other people. So the problems that were there in the first place that caused the explosion have not been resolved. Your behaviors have not changed. In fact, what happens to most people is that they realize that whatever it was they wanted to have improved by behaving differently has not happened, because the other people that they've exploded at are still stuck in that moment. And so the frustration that you feel as a result of things not rectified, I've done all these things, I've cleaned the house, I've done whatever, I've taken you shopping, I've bought you whatever, nothing's changed. So you become irritable. There's the tension in the house has not gone away. You feel resentful. You become impatient and intolerant. You feel walked over as a result because nothing's changed and things are still the same, and you've done all this stuff in order to make things better. You feel not listened to, and of course at the end of the day you feel resentful because things haven't changed, because they can't, as long as the other person in your world feels the same that they did at the time of the explosion. And for them, nothing has been resolved as a result of what has happened. In fact, what happens is the more you feel frustrated and resentful, the more it builds up until eventually there becomes this explosion again, and the cycle just continues. Now, as that cycle continues, you go through the same stuff over and over again. You apologize, you feel guilty, whatever. You can only say sorry so many times and repeat the behavior so many times before the other people in your life will never accept you're sorry. Because for most people, they will be expecting the build-up and they will be expecting the explosion. None of this is helpful. None of it is going to repair your relationship. It's just going to make it worse and worse and worse over time. And I've had people say to me that they understand this cycle. They can see, and they're aware as to where this cycle sits in their lives. And it's almost like for some people we're talking about them. And you may feel that way, that this is a conversation we're having about you and what's happening for you. Well, if it is, here's your opportunity to break it. What we're talking about now is your opportunity to break this cycle so that it never, ever happens again. The only way that you can break it is to not go to the explosion period again, to not express this aggressive behavior, to understand that you're not always right, that there is another perspective, to learn to listen and to understand what other people are saying, to deal with that fact that you might feel criticized or you might be not understood, and to start to wonder about where does all of that come from, and is that about this person or is it about other issues that might sit in my life? Most people feel powerless, helpless, and hopeless. Most men, anyway, feel powerless, helpless, and hopeless. And it's helpful sometimes, I think, just to have conversations about that sense of powerlessness. Why do you feel powerless? Why do you feel helpless? And what is there about the relationship that makes you feel hopeless? And is that all about the other person? Probably not. It's probably primarily just about you. So as we go back there, hopefully you will find a way to deal with it. Now, one of the things that you can do to break aside, and this is only one of them, but it's only a temporary thing. This is not necessarily about resolving an issue on a full-time basis. This is something that you can only use spasmodically, and it helps to put a safety valve into the relationship, and that is actually about time out. So what is time out? So when you're about to go through this explosion period, and you feel the build-up coming, rather than going there, you say to your partner or the other people involved, I want to take time out. I just want to be able to go away and think about the way I'm feeling at the moment, because I don't want to go to this place where I explode. So you remove yourself from the situation. Often I suggest that you set an hour. So you say to a person, if it's say 8 o'clock at night, I'm going to go away. So you go out of the house. You don't stay in the house. You don't drive a car or a motorbike. Often just go for a walk, go down to the park, whatever. But I'm going away at 8 o'clock. I'm coming back at 9. So, and you need to adhere to that, because this is about you establishing a rule, and that you're sitting by that rule so that the other person knows that you're going to be back at that particular time. And there's a reason for that I'll go into in just a moment. So this is an opportunity to release your tension, do something physical, get rid of something anger. So simply hop on a push bike and go for a ride, or go for a run, do something physical in this particular time frame as well. Think about your thinking during timeout. Are you owning and taking responsibility for how you're feeling? Challenge this stinking thinking that you've got. Ask yourself, what am I really feeling here? What's happening to me right now? What's the real problem? And how can I resolve this? And I think it's really important to ask: is this about me, or is this about the other person? Is this about things that other people are doing to me, or is it about what I'm thinking about these people? And is it about a larger perspective of myself, not just about this individual person? So often people will find that the things that they're thinking about have got kind of like this pattern that's happening in their lives, that it's not just about this one person. This is, look, I've been living this stuff over and over again, and it's manifesting itself in my relationship. So it's not then about them, it's about this pattern, and why is this pattern continually exerting itself in your life. Now, when you get back, you check back with the other person, be prepared to talk about the issue, see whether they would like to talk. So if you explode a lot and the other person is feeling offended by your exploding, and then suddenly you're deciding to walk away, there's a good chance that the other person in your life will be thinking, well, he's going to come back, or she's going to come back, and they're going to be angry, and that's just going to make things worse. And I don't know whether I want to talk to them when I'm feeling upset and distressed, and I think that they might be angry. So when you come back, you need to check out with the other person as to whether they're in a position to talk. It's not about not talking about it. It's about maybe not talking about it at that particular time, but it's about coming back and talking about it later. And so if they don't want to talk, you say, well, look, okay, that's fine by me. let's organise a time, perhaps the following day or whatever, because we still need to talk about what happened, so that I can tell you how I'm feeling, but you don't make it about them when you have that conversation. When try to resolve the issue, take responsibility for your actions, own your feelings. These are really important ideas. Don't blame and listen to the other person's point of view. So often it's important to just shut up and hear what the other person has to say and how they perceive your behaviour. So we won't do the weekly assignment because that's not all that important. But what I want you to do is to take note of your feelings. How have you, do you relate to the anger cycle that we talked about? What is that like for you to think about that? And what is it that you can do that will specifically break that cycle? So what behaviours can you implement that are going to, so that cycle will never repeat itself again in your life with the people that you care about the most? Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care. Look after yourselves. And I look forward to being with you next time. So stay tuned to these sessions. If you've got any further questions you'd like to ask me, to click the link below or let me know, and so that I can get back to you at a later date. Take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.